Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Emerging Brands with Kelly Bennett. I have a very special guest, someone who I absolutely love following on Instagram. One, because she shares great content, but two, she shares great food finds. And especially in Brooklyn, I've been following along her journey. And Delaney Vetter, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. This is
You're
so exciting.
so
So
welcome.
fun.
So welcome. So, Delaney is a copywriter and PR strategist for food and beverage brands, CPG brands. And I was just telling Delaney before I hit record, I really admire how much she's niched down and how you've built a business in such a niche market. And so I would love to kick it off, Delaney, of how did you start your business? What is your story? I want to know all the things.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people who are like freelance or independent copywriters or PR people or whatever creative field insert here.
Right.
Um, worked at agencies for a really long time or worked in-house and then left to start their own thing or are doing it as kind of like a side hustle in addition to their job. Mine was a little bit different because I kind of accidentally started my business in a way. I studied communication in college and thought I would go the traditional route of get a PR agency job or get a job at a magazine and build my way up from there. And honestly, just didn't really know what other paths existed. And I graduated right into COVID in 2020. And so there were no jobs. Everyone was fired. Everyone was laid off. My verbal offers from agencies like disappeared overnight. Like grants my friends and I had applied for just immediately disappeared. And so, which sounds all really stressful and scary. And it wasn't actually, I mean, the whole like pandemic of it all was, but I think because no one had jobs, it was
Mm.
almost a little bit freeing because I think being, a 21-year-old going out into the real world feels really scary and stressful, and having a little bit of that pressure taken off was really nice. And basically, I was doing all the things you're like quote unquote supposed to do. I was doing the informational interviews. I was applying for whatever there was. And there's really wasn't a lot to apply for at the time because no one really knew what was going on. And in my process of doing these informational interviews and chatting with like old colleagues and networking, someone who I'd worked with at an agency before was like, hey, I have a friend and they need help with copywriting and some PR, like 5 hours a week. Would you be interested? And at that point, I was like 2 weeks away from graduating. I had nothing on the books. I was moving to Utah for the summer to stay with family, just to like ride out whatever was going on. And I was like, okay, sure. I'll be done with school. I have no job. I'll be really bored. That would be great. That'd be a great thing for me to like fill my time, get some experience while I'm on the like quote unquote real job hunt.
Right.
And so I started working for this company that was not food and beverage, so kind of unrelated, and started doing some freelance work for her. And quickly, that 5 hours a week became 10 hours a week. And then it was 20 hours a week. And then she was introducing me to clients and friends of hers who also needed help with those things. And so by August, after graduating, I had this full client load that had kind of been handed to me in a lot of ways. Not necessarily brands that were my like dream companies, dream industries to work with. But I think that was the first time where I was like, oh, there are like different options here. Like I don't have to necessarily go the traditional route for my career. And also, I think because of everything that was going on in the world, there was a lot more freedom. Like everyone was working from home. People, just had a lot more flexibility in general. And I felt like I really had to give it a shot. Like, what opportunity do I have? I was like, I'm living at home, I'm rent free, like, nothing is holding me back now. I don't have, an expensive mortgage to pay or anything. So, this is like a great time to like take a risk on this. And so I stopped applying for jobs. I turned down a job offer it was actually for a food company, which is kind of funny now. And decided to kind of go all in, like take it more seriously. I had a lawyer write up contracts for me. I started putting a website together. I did all the like businessy things. And then January that next year is when I started being like, okay, well, I want to be more intentional with the brands I work with. And that's when I started, not just taking the referrals that came to me and saying yes to everything, more like seeking out the brands I wanted to work with and positioning myself as, the go-to communications gal for food and beverage brands.
I love everything you just said. One, I want to also give you a shout out for graduating college and already having that entrepreneurial spirit of figuring it out and really having the confidence to step out on your own. Like that's something that most people, even 10 years plus in their career, can feel really overwhelmed by just on a confidence level. And I just want to say, like, good for you. That's amazing.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And
it's been a wild ride.
No, and I resonate with your story in the sense that when I graduated college, that was 2009.
Very similar, like mirrored.
Yes, that was the recession back then. And it was like, there was no jobs. No one was hiring. And I was like, well, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I've been building businesses and being an entrepreneur ever since. So I could empathize with that feeling of like, well,
gotta figure it out. Gotta do something.
Gotta do something. Gotta figure it out. And I think that really also speaks to when we have these times in our economy when everything feels upside down. Entrepreneurship is usually on the rise because you have to figure it out. And so I love how that really also worked out. And again, another great takeaway is that you said yes to something that wasn't maybe ideal to what exactly you were looking for, but it was that stepping stone to really build the business that you have now.
Yeah. And I don't know if I really realized at the time either, because I think some of those first clients were very much not my vibe. And I remember, when I had to like, quote unquote, like fire my first client, I remember being like, oh, thank goodness I'm done with that one, like on to the next, like on to better things. And I think I can look back now and be like, well, that was really not ideal. And it wasn't a great client experience. It wasn't a super healthy work environment, but I now have like a crash course in boundaries and setting these things up for my business that I, have friends who've been freelancing for 5 years and they've never had that experience. And so they haven't had to deal with that. And then it comes up and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, my contract doesn't protect me enough. I, or still doing hourly or all these different things that kind of, I feel like I found out really quickly because I didn't know better. And I think if I had gone, into an agency and then into another agency, I might have, been like, oh, well, this worked at this agency and this one worked at this one. So yeah.
I think it's also speaking to the fact that even when something doesn't go quote unquote perfectly, you actually can learn a lot and leverage that so you can build actually what you want.
Yeah.
Boundaries too. The sooner that you learn that, the better. Like that's the unlock of building a business, is having good boundaries. So let me ask you this. What did you want to do differently? I know that you've really niched down to food and beverage brands. It's a cool combination of copywriting and PR. Give me a little bit more behind the scenes of how that all works.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I've always really loved to write. So I knew the copywriting thing was going to be part of it. I also think my internships have been at PR agencies and it was a food related PR agency. That was like my main internship in college. And so
very cool.
I already had a little bit of that experience. I've just always been obsessed with food. So I didn't know necessarily what way that was the first experience where I was like, oh, there's jobs in food that isn't just running a restaurant. And I think like the food media world was so interesting to me because I didn't even know that existed. I was like, oh, there's like Food Network stars, there's like Ina Garten, like love. But other than that, like, I don't know if I want to be waking up at 4 a.m. to go work in a bakery every day. Like, I just didn't know if that was for me. Even though I love food. And so that internship really like opened up my world to, oh, I can work like in the food world and not necessarily be the one making the food all the time. And so knew that I wanted that involved in what I did. I knew I wanted food to be part of it. And when I was like, more intentionally positioning myself as a professional and ad service provider in the space, I don't know if I necessarily realized what my differentiators were at the beginning, but now it's really understanding that these brands that I work with tend to be like women and minority owned in their first like 5 years of business, some longer, but really in that like growth stage. Like they are maybe trying to bring on investment, or they are totally bootstrapped and haven't had any investment yet, but they're really, they just want to get their name out there. They want to grow, they have big dreams, and they need people to help them. And from working with agencies, like both, as a consultant and in-house, whatever, I've just seen there's just a lot of like holdups with it. You write a pitch and it has to go through 7 people before it gets sent out. Like, it's just, things don't move as quickly. And when you're a small, scrappy startup, you can't afford that. You can't afford to waste any time, let alone the price point that larger agencies are at. It's just not equitable, because you have these brands that deserve to have their stories shared, but they can't afford to pay this giant agency $25,000 a month, literally, to do their PR. And so the brands that can afford that are the ones that are getting the features and getting the press. So that's like a really big differentiator for me, is being like a 1-person team. I can be at a more startup friendly price point. I can, work with brands more closely, and we can, pivot really quickly and be more dynamic in what we're working on, because I don't have to go play this game of telephone with people and figure out what we're going to do. I can just, be on a call with a client. They say something's going on. I can say, okay, perfect, I'm going to go do that thing. And same thing for copywriting. I, can be working really closely with the brand more as an extension of their team than this outside agency, who the person you're on a call with might not be the person who's actually writing the copy for you. And there are some agencies that are really wonderful and great. And I also have had some clients who've come to me from agencies who felt very like forgotten. And they're like, that's a really big investment to make, to not feel like you're a priority.
Absolutely. And I think that you touched on a lot of important things that startup brands are looking for. They're looking for that extension of their team, and they're in the in-between stage of maybe not being ready to hire someone full-time, and they don't really necessarily fit within the agency space. So looking for those people that they could trust and rely on to help them build their brand, that is essential. You need those people. So I really love how you filled in that gap. So tell me too, because I think that for many startups, understanding all the nuance that it takes to build a brand, and especially when it comes to, say, copywriting and PR, I've noticed that many people are like, I don't necessarily understand the process or like how it works. I think with design, because it's so visual, they're like, okay, I need a logo. I know I need a website. I know I'm going to need social media. But as far as that communication, there is a little bit of a disconnect. I've just seen that in brands I've worked with. So how do you explain the impact of having good copy and also integrating really good copy with a PR strategy?
Yeah, great question. I agree. I think there are things that are so visual and obvious. I've had so many brands that have been like, oh, perfect, we set aside $10,000 to hire a design our website for us. But they didn't leave any money for a copywriter. And so then you end up with this really beautiful, on brand, like really solid, consistent design. and no words to back it up. Or, someone at the company, like the founder is like, well, I'll just write it. And
Right.
some people are amazing writers and some people totally understand, and can do it themselves. Sure. But at the end of the day, like, you're wasting money if you're not having those things go together, because just as much as your brand colors need to be consistent and your fonts need to be consistent, like your voice and your tone needs to be consistent too. That's why companies like Reformation or
Hmm.
Allbirds, like those are ones that come up a lot in like the copywriter circles, of like, they have a really, consistent, obvious brand voice. And if you read a post from theirs, you would know it was there. It wouldn't feel like disconnected. And
Right.
maybe as a consumer, you wouldn't realize right away. Like if you were reading an email from Glossier and they totally like left all of their, like brand guidelines, like they totally just ignored them, you might not notice it as like, this is wrong. They didn't put this thing in here. But you might be like, this is kind of not a great email, or like, this sounds kind of weird. This is kind of confusing to me. And so being able to have the copy to back up your design is really important. And same thing for PR, like PR and copy. I think the thing that is hard for some founders is copy. I think is a little bit easier, but for PR, it's not like a set deliverable you're getting. You're getting
Right.
the like expert on your team to support you in, increasing brand awareness, protecting your reputation, sharing your story. And that's not always the most tangible thing, because, it's about more than getting the press. And the press is great. And you can totally like count how many press hits you get to like measure that. But there's a lot of other things that it's not like this clear ROI. And I think that is really hard for a lot of founders, especially ones who've been, maybe they were more on like the business side of things before. And so they're like, well, what's the ROI to doing
Right.
this? What's this? And same thing with copy. Like, I could talk about the ROI thing all day, but like if someone comes to me and they're like, what's the ROI of redoing the copy on our website? I'm like, well, I can't give you a number for that, but I can tell you that here are the things that it'll improve. Like, you want someone to come to your website and you want it to feel like an elevated experience. Like, how do you want people to feel when they're interacting with your brand? Your copy needs to match that, because it doesn't matter how good your product is. You're competing against so many other products. And so if you don't stand out with your copy and your design, and you're not getting new eyeballs on your product because you're facilitating a PR strategy, like, you're going to have a tough time. Yeah. I think if you look at any of the brands that are performing really well in any given category, they're likely doing those three things really well.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think one of the biggest misses that I find from emerging brand founders is finding a voice for their
Mm-hmm.
brand. And I think that's where copy really comes in. And then you're able to leverage that voice for social media, for your website, for packaging, for PR, right? And it all builds from there. So I think what you're doing is just so impactful. And I've seen the power of good copy over the years for brands. It's like, no, put this on your priority. This is really
Yeah.
damn important. For someone who's getting started, and we'll say more so from a food and beverage
Mm-hmm.
emerging brand point of view, obviously we know the importance of copy and PR. But anything else that you would say to them, or maybe getting them ready to invest in copy and PR? What would you encourage a new founder to maybe put on their radar or to think about?
Yeah. I think on the PR side specifically, not every brand is ready for PR yet. And I've
Mm,
also seen, while it's super important, there are things you have to have before PR can work for you. And I've seen a lot of brands invest in PR too early because someone told them they should. And then they don't have the resources on their team to back it up. So that's things like, if you are paying someone to do PR for you and your social media is like not good, and you're not
right,
posting consistent content, and you just don't have a clear identity, then there's really no point in paying for PR, because you need to know who you are so we can tell people who you are.
right.
So that's part of it. also other like logistic things like distribution, make a big difference. You know, there are some brands that, and I'm always very honest about this in a very nice way, but like there are some brands that aren't necessarily like story worthy. Like they're not doing something that national PR is going to help. Maybe they could focus on local PR, or maybe they could focus on influencer, it'd be better for them. There are just certain things that are just trickier. Or like even like legalities, like supplement companies. Like there's things that there are a lot of some publications that won't even cover supplements because there's not enough research around them. So things like that are
That's
things
a
to
great
consider.
point.
Yeah. And like not every PR agency will tell you that. Like I was on a call today with someone and I was talking to them about their brand, like a potential client. And I was telling them these things that are like, oh, well, you know, I think the reason you're struggling with this thing, but national coverage is because you're not distributed nationally. And if someone can't order your product online and you don't have your affiliate set up, we're not going to get coverage. And they're like, we've worked with 2 other agencies and no one's ever told us that before. And which was like very sad for me. But I
Wow.
also think you have to just make sure that you have the things in place and that you're putting a team in place that's going to like be honest with you, because I think sometimes, you know, they're looking out for them. They don't want to lose you as a client. And if, you know, if they
Right.
might lose you as a client because they're telling you these things, it's a tricky thing. But yeah, and like you want your design to be really good if you're doing PR. Like I've had brands where they've come to me and the product's really cool and they have a really cool founding story, but their packaging is just like not media worthy, I guess is a nice way of
Right.
putting it. And I've had to be like, hey, like, are you planning a rebrand anytime soon? And you know, I don't think we'll be able to get coverage based on where your product is at now. And that's really hard to hear for some founders. And it is a bit subjective, but there are certain things that just, it's just, you know, it's all about the picture. They want to know it's a pretty product and they wants to look good on the big editorial spread. And then on the copy side of it, I just think in general, there's so many things your brand can spend money on. And I work with founders of all different budgets and things like that. And I just think you need to get really clear on like what your priorities are. Like if your priority is to get into more retailers, that's great. But then that's going to dictate our strategy here. If your priority is to be a thought leader, that's going to be different. You know, who's your competition? Like those are all big questions to ask, but also, you know, maybe you don't need to have a in-house graphic designer and someone doing all these new newsletters for you and be posting on every single social platform and have sales teams in all these places and be doing all these activations and like all these brand partnerships. Like you just don't need to do it all, and you
Right.
can't probably do it all well. And so picking like a couple areas you want to focus on. And I think a little bias here, but I think getting your brand set up, like getting the design, getting the copy, getting your brand voice and messaging like set should be kind of your number one thing, as long as the product is already good. You know, like there's some brands who maybe they're like, well, I don't want to invest a bunch into these things yet because we're still evolving as a brand. That's totally fine. But then you shouldn't be paying for PR and influencer marketing and those things yet either.
1,000% agree. I love how you just said that, because I think that this is the really honest advice that so many people don't receive, and they end up wasting money, wasting
Oh,
time, getting
yeah.
frustrated, spinning their wheels, where it's like, if someone just maybe spoke a little bit more candidly with them, it could
Mhm.
have helped them in the long run. So I think that was really solid
Sure.
advice.
Well, and it bums me out because I think there are a lot of I like to think like well-meaning, like consultants and people like that in this space that companies pay a lot of money to tell them how to make their business grow. And a lot of the ways they tell them to make their business grow is just spend more money on all these different things. And sometimes those things aren't right for every brand. Like not every brand is a good fit for PR, just like not every brand is a good fit for influencer marketing. And
Right.
sometimes, you know, same thing with the retail. Like some brands, like maybe direct to consumer is the right path for you. Maybe retail is, maybe you're doing food service. Like there's so many options. And I think, I guess I just like take everything, like take all the advice you're getting with like a grain of salt, because you know your brand the best. Like, you know what is going to work for you, and having experts you can trust is great. But Yeah, I've just seen some founders that I've worked with and, that I know just get like a little bit burned because they just like blindly took advice of someone that they thought had their best intention in mind and probably did have their best intention in mind. But
I've come across that many, many times of like, well, I've already worked with this person and they told me this. And I'm
Mhm.
like, yes. And, I don't
Yeah,
want to shit on anyone else's work,
no.
but really, I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you where you need to focus. So I really
Yes.
appreciate that candidness too.
Right. Or
Um,
brands that spend all this money on design and then the design is like not good. And I'm like,
oh,
oh
I know. Or just like, again, the brand voice or the messaging, like
no.
something's a little bit off. You
Yeah.
need all the pieces. You really do. And I don't
Absolutely.
think that you necessarily need all the pieces on day one. I think there's some things that you can grow into and
Mhm.
test out and experiment and find what's going to really resonate with people. But then when you find that, doubling down on it.
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
know, that's what I do with many brand founders too. It's like figuring out what's the thing that's hitting or will
Yep.
hit and then helping them double down on it and then bringing that more to the
Yeah.
forefront. So for someone who's listening, who's like, okay, Delaney, I need your help. I am an emerging food and bev founder. My brand, I'm understanding that I need good copywriting.
Mhm.
I'm feeling like PR is something around the corner that I need to put on my radar. How does someone work with you?
Yeah. So there are kind of, I guess there are three main ways. So one is PR retainers. So that is I'm your PR partner. I act like I'm your in-house publicist and we'll work to get your story out there, to share your news, all that fun stuff. And that's, like a longer term partnership, monthly retainer kind of deal. And then on the copy side, there's two ways. So there's like ongoing copywriting and content writing support. So that's things like social posts, emails, blogs, advertisements, like stuff like that. Like basically a retainer for copy. And then there's those kind of bigger scale, like one-time projects. So, or that hopefully to do one time. So website copy, and then my brand messaging and voice guide is like probably what I do the most for like smaller brands, where that's putting together all of your brand voice guidelines, taglines, all that good stuff. And then some clients
Love
will add
that.
on like packaging copy and things like that. Those are kind of like bigger things that like hopefully just exist and you don't need to change. Yeah, those are
I
kind of the
love
main
that.
ways.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. Oh, wait, before I let you go, what is your
Yeah.
website and what's your social?
My website is delaneyvetter.com. I have a contact form on there, but also my email is on my contact page, I think. And then my Instagram is at delaneyvettercom, COMM, like communications. Some people get confused. They're like, what's your last name? Is it Vettercom? But that's my Instagram. Yeah, and you can message me there. You can message me on LinkedIn or email me, and happy to chat.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
This was such a refreshing conversation and such an important conversation that I will absolutely be sending to clients who are building brands and need this really great, straightforward advice. Like, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me, Kelly. This was
You're
great.
so welcome. And I'll see everyone on the next episode.